is purpose in late life. There is more than just turning on the cable news and sitting in your recliner all day. And so number one, I think they need to know that they still have purpose, a God-ordained purpose. And then remind them as well that what they're doing with their life at this moment is shaping the legacy that they're going to leave behind. It's not about money. It's not about things. It's not about your crystal or your golf clubs or whatever you're going to leave behind. It's about how are you going to use your life at this point in this season of your life to impact others.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski, and I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church Richardson. And with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick.
Hey, Eric, it's good to be back with you again. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and it's obviously got us thinking about the things that we are grateful for in our lives. As we go into today's conversation, we're particularly thinking about those people who are in generations older than us that we are grateful for. Personally, one of my favorite things to do is when I see an older pastor or a retired pastor, I always like to ask them for advice. What's something that you've learned over the course of your career that I, as a pastor on the front end of my career, can learn from, and some wisdom that I can glean from, and I'm never disappointed by their answers?
Well, and the reality is that we all have people in our lives, whether it's our parents, grandparents, mentors, teachers, pastors, other folks who are older than we are, that provide us wisdom, that provide us guidance. You know, there really is no substitute for time and experience. People might be gifted in particular areas, but the wisdom that comes from time and experience is not something that we can fabricate.
One of the reasons I love this podcast is because week after week, we get a front row seat to story after story of life experience and wisdom, that very wisdom that we're talking about. And it's just so fascinating to hear the different perspectives of the ways that different life stories have shaped people in unique ways and how unique wisdom comes from that.
It is definitely a huge privilege, and this is actually our last episode of Season 3. We've had a wonderful season with a diverse array of guests who have brought their stories and expertise and vulnerability to the podcast, and we're so grateful for them. We'll be taking a short break over the holiday season and are really excited to come back next year with Season 4.
I'm really looking forward to today's episode and that it's different than anything we've ever done. We were able to record the podcast for the very first time in front of a live studio audience. We have a group of senior adults that meets at our church here at First Methodist Richardson on a monthly basis called The Gathering. And so we were able to meet with The Gathering in our Worship and Arts Center. Unfortunately, Eric wasn't able to join the conversation, but I was able to speak with one of the foremost experts in what it means to age faithfully. And we're excited to have her on the show, Missy Buchanan. Help me in welcoming a noted author and speaker, Missy Buchanan. Well, Missy, welcome to the More Than Sunday podcast. We are so happy to have you today in front of this live studio audience. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks. I'm excited about being here.
Great. Well, one of the things that we do when we shoot or we record a podcast, one of the very first things we do is we like to set the context with our guest. And so would you tell us a little bit about your own history and background and how you got interested in the topic of aging faithfully?
I'm a lifelong Methodist. I grew up in Mesquite, Texas, back when it was a very small farm town or whatever. But, you know, church was just what we did. It was just, my first date was going to a church Valentine banquet, you know. So it was just, that was my life. My parents were so involved in church. And what I realized is as my parents aged, and particularly by the time they got to their, probably mid-80s, they had moved to a senior living community. And at first they were still very involved in driving back to their church and participating. They were still driving for Meals on Wheels, delivering food to others. But as often happens, it was change over time. And when they were no longer able to drive back to their church, I made a false assumption because I had assumed that the church was there for my parents. And even though we lived about 20-something miles away, and I would go several times a week, it was not until one day that I heard my mother say, "It's been 6 months since anyone from the church has come to see us and serve us communion." And my heart broke. And I remember also listening to conversations of other residents that lived there in their senior community. And one would say to the other, "How you doing today?" And they would respond, "I'm just here. I'm just here." And I think God just put it on my heart when I heard those words that, as the church, we can and we must do better. And so it was out of experiences with my own aging parents, I really began writing for them.
Okay.
And I would just keep them in just little devotions, very brief, but always something about aging. And I would keep them in a loose leaf notebook. And before long, my parents were asking me to make copies to give to other, their friends and whatever. And when I'd go visit, they'd say, "I want a copy of that latest one." And so at that point, I sent them to Dr. Rick Gensler, who for the United Methodist Church globally was the director on the Center of Aging and Older Adult Ministries there in Nashville. And he hand-delivered them to Upper Room Books and said, "You need to publish these."
Wow. So
my publishing story is, so totally atypical. And I do think it's just kind of a God wink moment.
And so they started publishing these devotionals that you had been writing for your own parents.
Right.
Oh, how cool
And that
is that?
became my first book, which is called Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body. Yeah.
Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then at some point you started writing these devotionals, and then there was an event that took your career to the next level. You were able, and you'll have to connect the dots for us, but you were able to co-write the memoir of Lucy Marian Roberts,
Right.
who is the mother of Robin Roberts from Good Morning America.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Can you tell us the story of
Yeah.
how that all came to fruition?
It was another one of those God wink
Okay.
moments, because I was home one afternoon and my husband came in and he said, the phone rang and he answered. He said, "It's for you. I think it's an older woman. I don't know who it is." And so I answered the phone and this voice said, "Is this Missy Buchanan?" I said, "Yes, it is." "Is this Missy Buchanan who wrote Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body?" And I said, "Yes, it is. And I'm wondering, who is this?" And then she said, "Well, my name is Lucy Marian Roberts. You probably don't know me, but you might know my daughter, Robin Roberts of Good Morning America." And actually, I did know Lucy Marian's name because I watched the show, and if you watched Robin very much, you kind of knew,
Sure.
Lucy Marian's name. She said, "I called to ask you one question. How did you know what was going on in my mind when you wrote that book?" And the coolest thing that day is that we talked for almost 30 minutes. Here she was living in Pass Christian, Mississippi, and I'm in Rockwall, Texas. And we discovered that we had such things that we had in common that I never would have expected. We each had church pews in our homes. Mine came from a little antique store, and hers was salvaged from her Presbyterian church in Bay St. Louis following Hurricane Katrina, and it still had the watermarks on it that she would not let anyone remove those watermarks because she wanted it as that reminder.
Wow.
And we found out how we both love the music of the church. And so out of that experience, then I got to go do Good Morning America the first time for 2 years. That was 2008. In 2010, Robin finds out that her mother and I would call back and forth or send notes of encouragement to one another. And she couldn't believe it because she said, "My mother doesn't even call me." They talked every day, but it was usually Robin who talked to her mom. And so Robin said, "I want you to come on the show. I want to do a piece about aging." And so here's Lucy Marian Roberts. By then I had 2 books, and she's reading from my books on air. Robin had always wanted her mom to write her memoir. She told her, she said, "I'll write it, but only if Missy writes it for me." So that was another one of those God wink moments.
That is so cool. And so since that kind of put you on the map on a national level, as an expert in the field of aging, well, I guess you've been involved again with the United Methodist Center on Aging and Older Adult Ministry in the past. and you're continuously making presentations all around the country, really. Let's dive into this topic of aging, if you will. I've heard you speak elsewhere about some fears that are associated with aging at any age, really. But would you dive into that for us a little bit this morning?
Sure.
What are some of the fears and where do they come from?
I get to speak to a lot of senior adult communities and church groups and whatever, and often, particularly when I'm speaking for senior communities that are in other locations, and I'll spend the night there on campus. And so I have the opportunity to talk around the dinner table with a lot of older adults, and I would ask the questions, what is it that you think about if you wake up in the middle of the night? What is it that keeps you awake? What are the things you dread about growing older? And I would just jot these down, and I began to see that they were the same things. It didn't matter if it was Ohio or New York or Florida, the fears and all are the same. And I think it has a lot to do with the losses and dealing with the losses or the changes that come with aging. But things like, the number one, I think I don't want to become a burden. I worry the most about becoming a burden on my family. The loss of independence, the not being able to drive. Will I outlive my money? What if I hear the word Alzheimer's as a diagnosis, or Parkinson's? Or what if I have to move, and where will I go? What do I do with my stuff? And my children don't want it. I don't know, I'm not sure. And all these things are common, I think, and even for people your age. And Josh, I think if you really thought about what is it that you're concerned with, I think some of those same fears would bubble up.
Sure. So, are there things that we do in the church that perpetuate some of these fears?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not intentional. I think there is ageism in the church. That's, again, people have very good intentions, but just how they go about things sometimes. I was speaking at a United Methodist church in another state, and they were trying to figure out what to call their senior adult group. And these were the church leaders, not the seniors, but the church leaders. And one of them said, I think we should name it SAGE. Now, I've heard all kind of variations of the SAGE acronyms and all. But this one was Seniors Against Getting Elderly. And it was funny, kind of, until you think about it from the perspective of that person that's growing frail. And you think, I'm against you because you push a walker,
Right.
I'm also on Twitter and social media, and I think that's important for me to be able to contact, and connect with people. And I remember a few years ago, there was a young Methodist minister. I could tell from his tweets, approximately how old he was. I was thinking he was probably in his 30s, maybe early 40s. And he made a comment one day. He was complaining about the number of walkers and wheelchairs that were in the narthex, because he said there's such a turnoff to young families that we're trying to attract. And I thought about that, and I contacted him privately, because I said, I just want you to think about what you just said. I understand, we want young families and we want single adults and whatever. Of course we do. But we've got to be careful about what we say and how we say it and what that means to that older person who comes, it takes a lot of effort for them to get there and to be pushing that walker. It'd be much easier for them to stay at home. And so sometimes we're just not very sensitive in our conversation, or we'll hear a lot of comments about, they're just a bunch of gray heads in this church, as if gray heads equal a dying church. And I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of churches that have a lot of gray heads that are, they're vibrant. They're vibrant churches. And so much of it is just we need to stop and think about how are we talking about aging, be it intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, right. Or even talking about it at all.
Yes, exactly, and that happens too. Yes.
So it occurs to me, part of this ageism thing is it's this us-them mentality.
Oh, yeah.
And you would see it perpetuated from one generation to the next, and there seems to be a distance between generations. I'm wondering how much, what's informing this question is, just a couple weeks ago on this podcast, we interviewed 3 junior high students and 3 high school students. And we asked them questions about technology and asked them, well, what's one form of technology, or what is it about modern technology that your parents just don't get? And so they were able to give us some answers mostly about social media. But I'm wondering, in the context of this conversation, how much does technology and the rate of change separate generations?
Huge.
Yeah.
I tell older adult groups, and I'm talking about from boomers on, okay? From boomers on, that you're living in a perfect storm. And what I mean by that is, just as you think that your body and your mind are slowing down, the world has never gone faster. It is different for this generation of older adults than it was even 30 years ago for someone that was the same age. And that's how rapid the change has happened. Change has always happened. Change is not all bad. But it's happening so fast that's what's just, and that throws us off. That throws our whole equilibrium off. And it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And I remind older adults all the time, you have embraced change all your life. If we just went back to what was your first telephone, and I remember having this conversation with you, Josh,
Sure,
about,
yeah.
Josh, we were talking about our first telephone numbers. And I said, I can remember mine. It was Atlantic 55392, and my parents' office number was Taylor 12062. And he looked at me like, there were numbers and letters, names in there, and that was totally foreign to him.
I had never heard of that before.
Yeah. And then I was telling you about college, that we had a whole series of beeps. We had one phone in the hall, and we had a series of beeps. If you had a phone call or a visitor, it was all by these beeps. And I could tell that to my kids, my grandkids, and they're just like looking at me blankly.
Sure.
It's the change that's happened so fast. It's how rapidly it's happening. It just never happened as fast as it is now. And so technology plays a huge role in all that.
Well, and I can think personally how much that intimidates me. I've got, I think it's an iPhone 8 or something like that, and there are new iPhones advertised that just came out, and then I saw something about a new one that's coming out in next year, and I can't keep up for what I should have and what the newest technology is. And so I think about the anxiety it gives me, this kind of FOMO they call it, the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would be like for someone who hasn't had cell phones as a part of their entire life, and a totally different perspective.
I was talking to someone just yesterday, and they were saying that their father, his old flip phone had finally conked out, and they had to get him a new cell phone, and he's just like paralyzed with fear about, what do I do with it? And what happens, and this is kind of good, this is coming up during the holiday season or whatever, because families often will give a piece of technology, an iPad or a new phone, to their aging parent and show them how to use it one time, and then think that they've learned it and, they're done and whatever. Well, that's just not the way we work. We need someone to sit alongside. I need someone to sit alongside me, show me, let me learn it and whatever. So
we have a lot of nodding heads in here.
Yeah,
people who
I can tell.
Had that experience. Okay, so then if we unintentionally perpetuate ageism within the church, I would imagine that one of the remedies for ageism is intergenerational ministry, right?
Yes.
This ministry that intentionally finds creative ways to bring generations together, to not only just talk, but to form relationships. Have you seen good examples of intergenerational ministry within churches?
I have, but not so many times. What happens, it'll be like a one-shot thing.
Yeah.
It'll be a one-time event or something that brings people together to build relationship, and then it kind of dissipates. And so I think until we get to the point that it's intentional with all of our church life and whatever, what's happened, is that we've separated age groups, and that's not a bad thing, except that when it happens that we no longer all come together. I see more intergenerational ministry going on in smaller churches than I do larger churches.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason why, So it has to, you have a great example of when you were at Duncanville. I think that's a tremendous example that you did. Tell them about that.
Okay, so, to be fair, it was kind of a one-off. It was a great event that we had that I had hoped would spin into something more sustainable. And it was creative. So we did a thing that was, it was intergenerational speed dating, if you will. And so we invited our youth group to show up, and we invited one particular Sunday school class to the event. And I had ahead of time asked those people from the Sunday school class, an older adult Sunday school class who were going to participate, I asked each person to bring one item that they could tell a story about. And they sat in a circle, and then the teenagers sat in a parallel circle, an interior circle facing each other. And every 3 minutes, the teenagers would get up and shift seats. So the older adult Sunday school class would tell their story over and over and over. And one lady brought a street sign from the original house that her grandfather had built. And one gentleman brought a replica model of it was a warship that he had served on. And so they told these stories over and over. And then we had a quiz at the end, and we tested the teenagers to see who had been listening the best. And it was just a great opportunity to get some of our older adults in front of our teenagers to learn each other's name. And the coolest part was, actually, to talk about sustainable afterward, was that they, on Sunday mornings, instead of just walking past each other, would acknowledge each other's presence, which seems like a small thing, but really it isn't, to be able to at least begin to plant seeds of culture change.
Well, it's stories that connect us.
Right.
It's stories that connect people of all ages. And so anything we can do to bring older and younger together to share stories. I told Josh, I said, those kids may not have remembered Mrs. Jones's name, but I bet you they remembered Mrs. Jones's story. And so the more that we can find ways to share those stories, and then that in turn leads to ministry opportunities together.
Right. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
So a lot of your books are about encouraging older adults. What do you find are some of the most effective ways? So let's just, for example, say that somebody here in our gathering audience has a friend who's just really struggling to find daily motivation. What would you tell them is a practical way that they could bring hope into that person's life and encourage them as they age?
Number one, remind them that they still have purpose. It is so easy as we age, particularly as we lose physical abilities or physical ability to do the things we once did. Maybe you did this for years and years. You went on that mission trip, you climbed on the roof, you painted and whatever, and you've gotten to a point where you cannot do that. And what happens very often is that then they just quit doing anything. And when they quit doing anything, there's a loss of purpose. It's like, why bother? And so I think about people that I've encountered that are really, really struggling. And they need that reminder. I love Dee Dee Cassad put it this way. She said, seniors are survivors earmarked for special assignment. Seniors are survivors earmarked for special assignment because there is purpose in late life. There is more than just turning on the cable news and sitting in your recliner all day. Lucy Marian Roberts was a great example of that to me. Here she was, someone who could no longer drive, who used a walker and a power chair. She had all kinds of physical ailments, and yet she found a way to be an encourager for me. She could pick up the phone, she could call, and she would end every conversation this way. She would say, I love you now. Now you keep writing and speaking for old folks like me because we need you.
That is too cool.
And how many times that I've been in an airport and my plane's delayed or I'm just tired and I hear Lucy Marian's voice because she chose to be a cheerleader in my life. And so number one, I think they need to know that they still have purpose, a God-ordained purpose. And then remind them as well that what they're doing with their life at this moment is shaping the legacy that they're going to leave behind. It's not about money. It's not about things. It's not about your crystal or your golf clubs or whatever you're going to leave behind. It's about, how are you going to use your life at this point in this season of your life to impact others?
That is so good. What about the church in general? I'm just thinking kind of big picture here. As we talk about perpetuating ageism, trying to combat ageism with intergenerational ministry, bringing hope to older adults, what is your hope for the church in general?
What I have seen, and one reason that I do what I'm doing, is because it seems the church generally has bought into the whole idea that faith formation ends when you get your first Social Security check. We're not being very intentional about encouraging our older adults. And keep in mind, older adults meaning there are really 4 subgroups of older adults: go-goes, slow-goes, no-goes, and add to that the boomers, not gonna make me goes. So there's a big group of aging adults.
Can you flesh those out a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
Go-goes, okay, that's kind of obvious. You're still active, still able to get on the bus and go to Branson to see the leaves. You can be gone for 2 weeks at a time. And, you got aches and pains, but generally life is good.
Okay, the go-goes.
Go-goes. Slow-goes, maybe it's change over time. Maybe it's a stroke. Maybe it's a heart attack. Something happens and life slows down. And you're not as willing to be gone for 2 weeks. You'll go for a weekend, but you need the security, you need the routine of your own place. Third, the no-goes. We all know no-goes that are living in maybe in assisted living or in nursing homes. Maybe they're homebound, where the only time that they're able to get out is to go to the doctor. And then add to that our boomers, and we're a whole nother, I'm a boomer, and we're a whole nother group, We think we're not going to grow old. We're trying as hard as we can not to grow old. And so you've got those 4 categories. Now I forgot what I was talking about.
So you're talking about the hope for the church and how we separate, there's 4 categories of people, and your overall hope for the church.
The overall hope for the church is that here's what I have seen that's happened that I hope that with your help that we can overcome this. We tend to put older adults in a boat that has no oars, it has no motor, and we push them out into a reservoir of faith that we think they've built up over the years. This is exactly what I saw with my parents. And we say, good luck. We wish you well. Because once they are unable to come back and participate in the life of the church, it's like, maybe we even go visit them once a month, but are we helping them to grow as disciples? What are we doing to help them to grow and to shape their legacy? Or are we just going by and doing a little, maybe we're serving communion and maybe it's a quick little visit and we're out of there. But what are we doing to help them in that faith formation? My hope for the church is that we would recognize that, our church leaders would recognize that all of us would recognize that, and that we would begin to strive for faith formation that continues until our last breath.
And I think it goes both ways. I recently read an article, I think maybe you even shared it online, about these college students who are renting rooms in an assisted living facility because of the symbiotic relationship. It's not just blessing the lives of older adults, but even more important, I think, is the older adults blessing the lives of the youngers.
Absolutely. I love that. And I wish that would just run rampant.
Right.
That would be so beautiful, because it is. It's not one versus the other. It is coming together because, youth can do things and can teach us things and whatever. And then the older adults have wisdom from experiences over a span of years.
That's right.
That is just so vital. And the church, to be genuinely healthy, needs both.
We need each other.
We need it all. We need each other.
That's right. Okay, so on the podcast here, we have one question that we ask every guest. And that is this. Up to this point in your life, what is one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
how fast life goes as you get older. I guess I would like to have known that. I don't know, but it does.
Maybe
it's something
ignorance is
I've learned. I think I heard that, but I don't think I understood that as to how quickly it just goes so fast. They talk about the toilet paper roll, that life is like a toilet paper roll. The closer to the end, the faster it goes, and I do believe that's correct.
I haven't heard that, but I get that image now.
Now you have that image in your head.
So let me ask a follow-up question. How do you look at life differently now because of that truth that you've come to know?
Oh, I think I try to savor those moments with the grandkids, with the kids, be more deliberate, be more intentional about gathering together as family, as friends, and trying to think always about what legacy is it that I want to leave behind? What is it that I want, or how is it that I want to impact my family members, my friends, so that when I'm gone, this is what's going to remain. And that's important.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Missy. It has been so good to have you on the More Than Sunday podcast. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Josh.
What a fun conversation. I just loved being able to interview Missy in front of the live studio audience. I really liked what she had to say about these different seasons of life, these go-goes and the slow-goes and the no-goes and the boomers, and how each season of life brings with it a different set of experiences, and yet in each season there is still a legacy to be left. There are still things of value to be passed on to younger generations, and the challenge it takes to be intentional in finding that value and finding how to tell your story, how to articulate your legacy so that those of us who are younger may benefit and glean from your wisdom.
I appreciated her challenge to remember that the gray heads in our congregation still have an enormous amount of value and a ton to offer both our church and our society. And we want to leave you with this scripture that reminds us of exactly that sentiment. This is Proverbs chapter 16, verse 31. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. This is our final episode of Season 3, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the premiere of Season 4. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Missy Buchanan for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in for the premiere of Season 4. Have a great week and a great holiday season.